introduce Scott Metzler. Scott, full disclosure, is my cousin and a person that I've really admired my entire life, except for maybe a few years in middle school, early high school, where we were really pretty skeptical of each other, I think, for a while, right? Do you remember that? It's kind of like awkward. But as we have become adults and moved on in our careers, he is someone that I've just always thought was amazing and cool. And he's described himself as a lifelong learner, which is probably one of the reasons I like him, because we have that in common. Just this idea that there's always something new to learn, something to grow. His particular interests are in leadership development, generational diversity, and leading through change. And as you probably saw in the messages I've sent out, he began his leadership journey as a firefighter with the Newton EMS department. He started as a paramedic, moved his way up the chain from paramedic to captain, battalion chief, deputy chief, and ultimately the fire chief before he retired in 2019. And he's now consulting and on the speaker circuit while he pursues his PhD in leadership from Antioch University School of Leadership and Change. So I'm really excited to have a conversation with him about what he's been learning about love and leadership. So Scott, let's have our conversation.
Excellent.
Yeah, so love and leadership, I mean, you either don't hear of that at all, or you might hear of it and kind of raise your eyebrow. And I'd raise one eyebrow if I can, but I can only do one.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit about what sparked your interest in the relationship between love and let's say good leadership.
Right. Yeah. So, well, first of all, I would just like to thank everybody for being here, and Jill, especially for creating this space for these important conversations to happen. And like Julie, I'm just really looking forward to this little program growing. It's just really important right now in our world. So leading with love. Yeah, I was raised in the fire service. And in my early formative years there, I would say, and I'm glad that my fire EMS brothers are here to kind of keep me honest. Leadership wasn't really a nuanced conversation. It was pretty autocratic. It was pretty top down. And so, orders were given by the bosses. The orders were carried out by the rest of us. And when that happened, life was pretty good. So if you showed up and do what you were told and kind of stayed in your lane, didn't cause trouble, you would probably keep getting paid and keep getting invited back. So that's what leadership looked like when I was a brand new firefighter. And at some point, I became aware of leadership conversations that were going on around me. And I felt kind of dumb because I didn't really know what they were talking about. I mean, I understood the concept of leadership, but when somebody would say, man, that was a poor leadership decision, or I expected better leadership from him or her, I wasn't really sure what they were talking about. And so what I noticed was when I asked questions about firefighting and doing CPR and driving the ambulance, I got really, really great answers. But when I started asking questions about leadership, I didn't get any answers at all. And so people would be a little bit put off and say things like, well, if you don't know what leadership is, I'm certainly not going to tell you, right? And so I eventually caught on to the fact that we're all saying the words, but we don't know what each other means, right? Which is a pretty hard way to bake leadership into the DNA of an organization, especially good leadership. And so, at a fairly early age, I thought, man, I need to figure this out. So the downside was eventually I ended up getting promoted into positions of authority, and I still wasn't sure what leadership was all about. And so I ended up doing what a lot of people do, and that is just leading like I was led. And so I inflicted some pretty, just some pretty crappy leadership on people just because I didn't know any better. And it wasn't until, embarrassingly late in my career that I figured out, it doesn't have to be this way. It can be a lot better. And we expect our firefighters to be at the top of their game. We expect our paramedics and EMTs to be, really dialed in. And it just occurred to me that they should be able to expect the same thing of their leaders. Like we should be at the top of our game. And so, somewhere around the beginning of the third trimester of my career, a couple of things happened. So I got promoted to a position of fairly high up on the chain of command. And our operating environment changed drastically. And so with the arrival of the millennial generation into our workforce, things changed for us. And it was obvious to me that the way we've been leading, the way we've been conducting business for the past 250 years isn't working anymore, right? And so that was the first thing that happened. The second thing that happened was, as an organization, we became aware that our community was both aging and growing. And so the needs of our community members were different. And if we were going to solve these new problems, we couldn't do it in the old way. And so we had to really take a step back as an organization and really get crystal clear about what good leadership was. So that's when I became really dialed into leadership. And then a third thing happened. I was at a presentation, and it was the presenter was the Wichita State University men's basketball team character coach. Okay, so they had a shooting coach and a dribbling coach. I don't know. I'm not a basketball player, but they had all these coaches for these technical pieces of their team, and they also invested in the character of their team members. And one of the things this person said really just stuck with me. He said, through good leadership, you can take a work group, turn it into a team, and even turn it into a well-performing team. But in the gap between good performance and high performance, like people, at the world-class level of their game, there's usually an ingredient that's missing, and that ingredient is love. And at first I didn't believe it, and I didn't want to hear it, because that was that's not leadership as I knew it, right? And then I stumbled across this book called On Caring by Milton Myeroff. And so I was, like you do, I was looking for something, and I stumbled across this, and I read this life-changing paragraph. And so Milton Myeroff, in the book On Caring, which is written like in 1971 or 1972, talks about love. And he says, love is the selfless promotion of the growth of the other. And I read that, and everything sort of coalesced, and I got it, right? So I had tried to, exercise leadership by, mastering my craft and setting a good example for people and holding people to high standards. And I thought, if I could do those three things, I'll be a good leader and people will want to follow me. And it turns out that's only a little bit of the equation, right? The other thing, the thing that really crystallizes teams and catapults folks into the stratosphere, is this idea of love, right? And so when you love what you do, and you love the people you do it with, and you love the people you do it for, that's when the magic happens. And so that was kind of the tipping point for me in my sort of desire to unpack and master leadership.
Thank you. That's awesome. You did. Yeah,
that was a lot.
No, but that definition of love, I think, like you said, that's the game changer. And it's not, because I think people misunderstand what love is. And I will just raise my hand as being someone who's been in a situation where love is not a healthy, the love is more like in a really dysfunctional family kind of love. Right. It can be love can be manipulative, and love can be, or quote unquote love, but true love, the way you defined it, is altruistic in its best sense. And I want to hear more about how that played out in your career, but I want to also widen the lens a little bit, because
Right, right.
we have all kinds of opportunities to practice leadership, and to practice leadership with love. So where else might this approach to leadership come into play in our lives?
Right. Yeah. Well, I think anywhere people exercise leadership is an opportunity to lead with love. And so, leadership already, on the call, people have talked about the different places they find to exercise leadership: home, church, little league football practice, work, your civic life, civic engagement, serving on boards, all of those places. One of the things that I tend to think is that anytime humans congregate and change is possible, in that gap between where we are and where we want to be, that's where leadership lives, right? And so I just think any place you look is a place for the possibility of leadership.
So it doesn't even have to be any place where there's a hierarchy of any kind.
Yeah, right, right. Yeah, and one of the things that's interesting to me, and one of the things that we did at Fire EMS to a lesser degree, is sort of try to dissolve the hierarchy a little bit. So obviously there's got to be people within a structure to maintain momentum and keep the wheels moving and the trains going on time. But the practice of pushing leadership down to the least common denominator, right? The customer or client or service facing people in an organization, when they're empowered to exercise leadership, and that's when we unlock a lot of potential, a lot of creativity, a lot of innovation.
Yeah, so you're also letting loose of the control in those situations,
which is super scary
Yeah.
for people like me, right? So I looking back, it seems like I was a crisis leader. I heard Jackie talk about crisis leadership. I just read an article here, I don't know, a couple of months ago, from a guy named Keith Grint, who's a scholar in the UK. And I don't remember the title of the article, but the subtitle was "Addicted to Command, Allergic to Leadership," right? And so Keith Grint talks about wicked problems, tame problems, and crises. And so each one of those challenges requires a different kind of leadership.
Wicked problems, tame problems, and crises.
Yeah. So wicked problems are these problems that we might not even know the bounds of the problems itself, right? So we're talking about things like gun control, racism, climate change. Like those are big, hairy, sort of nebulous problems. That requires a kind of leadership. Tame problems are those things that someone somewhere has the solution. We just need to find the right tool and apply it, right? So crisis, everybody's familiar with crises. So what Professor Grint said was a lot of crisis leaders treat all problems like they're a crisis, or they ignore problems that aren't crises until they become crises, and then they know exactly what to do, right? And so as I think about my leadership in the early years of my career, that was me, right? I was good at this one little thing, and I tried to apply that all over the board, and oddly, it didn't work.
In corporate America, they talk about putting out fires. That's your crisis leadership. Like you were like literally and figuratively putting out fires.
Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. How did your leadership change then? Like once you started adopting this mindset, what shifted in your organization and what shifted for you here in your mind or your heart, however you want to describe that?
Yeah, right. Well, I like the way you separate, the mind and the heart. And so, these wicked problems, these adaptive problems, those are the ones that live kind of from the neck down. And so in order to solve those problems, you not only have to change the way people think, but you have to change the way people feel about them, right? So what changed for me was the idea that I didn't have to have the answers. So this idea of heroic leadership or, the genius at the top of the pyramid, that's not how we're going to solve our current and future problems. And so, this idea of letting go of the power, empowering folks, authorizing folks to make decisions, which also, gives them permission to make mistakes and for those mistakes to be okay, right? So if we're making mistakes in the service of learning, those are good mistakes. That was a huge shift for a person like me who really needed to be the guy in charge, right? What I found was, through the course of turning loose of the power and the authority, that's how trust is built, right? When people feel trusted, people take chances, and that's what we were after. So it was a huge shift for me as far as my approach to leadership. And I like to think that filtered through the organization and made us a little better.
So I realized as we were talking that I forgot to ask my signature kickoff question.
You completely threw me off my game.
I'm sorry.
Not really.
I mean, for those of you who haven't been coming, as I mentioned, the idea of Healthy Exchange is sort of this relationship between, what Scott's talking about, only bigger, like this, how we interact with each other, how we're in community, how we're in relationship with each other, and our well-being. And so I thought maybe I'll ask you that question now that we've got a lot of backstory on where you're coming from. What does well-being mean to you?
Right. Yeah. So, for me, health and wellness and the sense of well-being comes from a place of balance. And so I find when I'm not balanced, in things like, the food that I eat and the way I choose to move my body and the things that I choose to think about and engage in, that if I don't find balance there, I don't find balance anywhere. I don't find that sense of wellness. And related to what we're talking about, I think that goes for relationships, maybe most of all, right? And it occurs to me that outside our family units, a lot of us spend a lot of time at work, and those work relationships are super important. And when I think about that, I think a couple of things. Number one, this idea that all work is human work. So for me, and I suspect for people like me, it's really easy to get hung up and focused on, the technical work we do, the things we put our hands on. So, filing, driving the fire truck, making the widgets, and forget the idea that all of that work is in the service of other human beings, right? Either people at the service delivery interface, the people that we work with, ourselves. I mean, we're all humans. We're all important to the process. And so we've got to act that way. And then the other piece is this idea that in a very real sense, leadership is a relational practice. And so I think you can judge the strength and the quality of leadership by the strength and the quality of relationship.